I'm going to start this series with the topic of disinformation. That's the deliberate sharing of misleading or inaccurate information. Disinformation hurts the general public in ways they don't understand or that are not obvious to them, typically through divide and conquer tactics. It helps a lot with the left-right divide and shaping a Hegelian dialectic. These are tactics that are very familiar to the truth movement. I don't really need to go into them. It's a topic I could go into on a future program, but not today. Today, I'm going to be talking about how it affects targets, because it does hurt them directly. One of the reasons should be obvious, because of what targets are accused of. They're accused of being delusional, lying, being stupid, being paranoid, reading too much into everyday occurrences. Guess what? The disinformation directed at targets looks very much like what they're accused of. When you, as a target, propagate disinformation, you are in effect hurting yourself. It's bad public relations, it's bad for your reputation, and when your public image is destroyed on top of everything else, you've got nothing. Another way in which disinformation hurts you is the actions you take because of your misconceptions, which are a result of disinformation. Like if you believe that you're in imminent danger of being killed. If you make a commitment based on what you think is happening, and that turns out to be wrong, that can have a major detrimental impact on your life. They're inventing disinformation at very low cost to them. You act on it and destroy your life, a very big cost to you. In short, for targets, disinformation kills. So, why does it spread? Why do targets spread information around without thinking about whether it's true or not? Well, it's because they want it to be true. Disinformation reflects what you want. What targets want, most of all, is vindication. They want the perpetrators to acknowledge what they've done. A close second, public acceptance of their stories. Related, you want validation of your personal story. There are many reasons disinformation gets spread around, but you'll find it's rooted in these three basic wants that TIs have. Related to people forwarding lies because they like the lies, well, they like the lies more than the truth. The truth is less pleasant than the lie. So when you confront disinformation, you're going to be coming face to face with some unpleasant truths. You're not going to like them. But confronting the truth is less unpleasant than continuing to be targeted. So let's proceed with confronting those truths. One unpleasant truth is that things TIs say aren't necessarily completely true. The way I think of it is like this. There's what's really happening to the TI, there's what the TI sees happening, what the TI thinks is happening, and what the TI tells others is happening. And those can be four very different things. Starting at the beginning, the falsehoods TIs repeat are rooted in being misled. And that's okay. Being wrong is okay. You're being deliberately misled, and you can't be expected to bat 1,000, even under normal circumstances. Being wrong is not a permanent condition. There's nothing wrong with you for being wrong. Related, targets will often be reticent with certain details of their targeting which might shed light on what's really happening in their case. They're reticent because they would have to disclose some embarrassing information. And this is understandable too. The tactics are built around personal details or topics TIs would rather not discuss, and this is done on purpose. Harder to explain is when you lie about details of your targeting to cover holes in your testimony. And I do see that happening in conference calls and even in person. People don't want to admit they're wrong. Confronting the possibility that you're wrong is one of those unpleasant truths. A common example, the voices in your head feed you information and you repeat it. People ask you where you got that information, and rather than admit you're getting it from the least trustworthy people in the world, you'll say you don't remember where you got it, or you got it off the internet. You'll say you heard it somewhere. Maybe you'll even rationalize it. That is the source for what I guess is a culture of disinformation that has taken root in the conference calls or on some TI websites. And people are just telling each other lies because they'd rather not admit to the unpleasant truths. When I first came onto this scene and started my own conference calls in late 2009, it didn't take me long to figure out that TIs weren't being 100% truthful about targeting. And if you take everything TIs say at face value, you're going to come to some conclusions that are not true. I guess people are always telling lies to protect themselves or their egos, but when you get a bunch of people telling each other lies and accepting each other's lies as truth, you've got a problem. A culture of disinformation. Another kind of lie that gets told by TIs is the noble lie. Exaggerating events, overlooking weaknesses in testimony to advance a noble cause. I have a personal anecdote where I encountered a noble lie. About 10 years ago, when I was at a school and I attended a women's studies lecture about the prevalence of rape on college campuses. And the professor who was speaking at that lecture, a PhD in women's studies or something like that, she repeated a factoid that had been debunked. It was 28% of women in college, or some ridiculously high number, I think it was 28%, have been raped at least once during their stay in college. And I knew this fact was wrong. It was based on an exaggeration of the truth. Rape does happen on college campuses, but that factoid was based on redefining many kinds of unwanted sexual contact as rape. To make a long story short, I confronted her in her office about this. I said, "You know, that study has been debunked." And she said, "It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. What matters is that it gets people focused on an important issue." I will never forget that. This professor was telling this lie knowingly to advance an agenda. And you know, preventing rape is a worthwhile agenda, but nevertheless, she was telling a lie, and people do pick up on that. They see through that. This tactic, telling a lie to advance an issue, really only works when people aren't paying attention. Since everything about advocacy involves getting people to pay attention, this is a self-defeating tactic. And unfortunately, I see this in some TI advocacy. Even simple word association games, in articles where anyone who has a position the author likes states things, makes a statement, and anyone who has a position the author doesn't like makes claims. These word games, which are completely obvious and transparent to outsiders, don't fool most adults. They're going to see right through that. They're going to view you as a propagandist. They're going to ignore everything else you're saying. They're going to dismiss the truth because they see the obvious lies. And that ends up hurting your cause. Another kind of untruth that TI spread around is rooted in scientific or economic misconceptions. One of those is implantless mind control. The idea that people can be controlled remotely without any kind of implant on their person. And who knows where this is coming from? A satellite, cell towers, whatever. HARP arrays, that's a favorite. And that's been spread around, and there are a couple of authority figures who have said, yeah, we can't find any implants. And Eleanor White has said on her website, modern methods don't require implants. And Dr. Nick Begich has said, look at all this evidence we have suggesting that, in fact, this is indeed happening. But when you look into that, when you dig deep down to the bottom of the sources that these people are using to come to these conclusions, there's really nothing there. It's just kind of wishful thinking. They decided what they wanted to find, and then they went looking for evidence. And that's an example of confirmation bias. Whatever you're looking for, if you're looking for evidence hard enough, you are going to find it, no matter what you're looking for. I've been confronted with documents from TIs many times where there's this 50-page document and there's a couple of sentences somewhere in the middle, and they mention investigations or sneak and peek or something like that. And you see, that just proves they're being gang-stalked. Confirmation bias is a major issue for TIs because not only is this a bad research method, but even if you're a good researcher, this has blindsided a lot of TIs, including myself. The handlers of a TI are in a unique position to confirm the TI's biases. They observe whatever the target talks about, whatever the TI believes, and then provides them with evidence suggesting that these things really are true. And I saw that a couple of years ago on the Gangstalking World guy's personal site. He was talking about Stasi hand signals. He'd seen people using hand signals around him. And of course he complained about them on his site, and the next day he'd get more hand signals. See, that just proves it. They're using hand signals to coordinate. This is a good point where I can get into some specific examples building on Gangstalking World. From the beginning, when I became aware of that person's site, it seemed suspicious. It looked like he was being overly cheerful, and the site was just a little too well designed. That was the way I saw it at the time. Just a little too professional, just a little too cheery. I didn't really take it seriously, but he seemed to be on my side, so I didn't go after his site. Anyway, that guy has been promoting manpower-intensive explanations of what TIs are going through. Originally going with this idea of Stasi, parallels to COINTELPRO, and so on. But about a year ago, he switched gears. Suddenly he was talking about threat assessment teams at OSHA, Occupational Hazard and Safety Administration. I was just looking at this when I found out about his change in focus and wondering, what on earth is this guy talking about? Why is he suddenly obsessed with OSHA? When I dug into his research, I found he'd fixated on this one phrase for reasons I didn't understand at the time. Threat assessment team. He'd clearly been looking for any documentation on the web that mentioned this phrase in an effort to prove that this was the one true explanation. Again, this is confirmation bias. If you look for something hard enough, you will find it. He found it. OSHA. OSHA is responsible for gang stalking. That was his story. But I still didn't understand why he had come up with that explanation. Well, that guy behind Gangstalking World also has a personal blog and goes out on the web to promote his site. There's nothing wrong with that. I've done that. Anyone who's got a site about an important issue or an issue they consider important, they're going to promote that site any way they can. But I encountered him on a psychology forum on the internet, and I finally said in November of last year, dude, you've been played. You've been led down the primrose path by con artists with access to mind control technology. And I explained why. I never heard from him again. Less than a month later, he stopped updating his site. Since November, all the updates on his site and on his personal blog have all been about mind control, synthetic telepathy, mind reading. The impression I get is they dropped the hammer on him. They let him know, this is how it really works. You've been writing about a lie for years. I found out where he got his threat assessment team terminology a few days ago. I finally poured through Nick Begich's book on mind control. It mentions threat assessment teams, briefly, in a paragraph-long blurb towards the end. It kind of suggests that this is how targets might be selected. A threat is assessed, and then the team goes after him. So that's where he got this phrase. This guy, the Gangstalking World guy, was obsessed with mind control several months ago, or even a year ago. And he was trying to merge his gangstalking thesis with mind control. And that's how he came up with threat assessment teams and OSHA. This seems like a pretty good explanation for why he stopped posting updates, too. Learning that everything you know is wrong can be quite a shock. I think the Gangstalking World saga is a good cautionary tale. There needs to be not only research, but meta-research. The meta-research needs to come up with the answer, why is this person interested in certain topics? That can help us unravel the truth behind stories that don't seem to make sense. Another example of disinformation is this idea of advanced perp technology. This phrase sounds ridiculous, but perp technology is a concept that's floating around. I think even Eleanor White's website uses that phrase. What Eleanor White is saying is that she's a professional engineer, so you should trust her judgment. And she's performed experiments with these instruments she has. A seismograph, a dosimeter, the whole 9 yards. She's got this idea that she's experimenting on them and finding out how their tricks work. But I don't really see it that way. I think what she doesn't understand is she's not experimenting on them. They're experimenting on her. What can we get Eleanor White to believe? That's the experiment. For example, the vibratory attack, which I've written about, and she's come to my website to attack my interpretation of it. I'm saying it's mostly neurotechnology. To debunk me, She cited a series of experiments she did where she determined, no, this stuff really sets off a seismograph. And the water in a glass on the table is vibrating and she's not touching it. So it doesn't have anything to do with neurotechnology. But this experiment wasn't really controlled by her. It was controlled by them. And she might not even have designed the experiment of her own free will. I don't think she's come to terms with the notion that she might have been moved around like a puppet without even realizing it. Putting myself in the handler's shoes, let's say I wanted to convince someone of the existence of this advanced technology that can make objects vibrate at a distance, with no line of sight, right through the walls and everything. And I had access to the target's mind through the use of neurotechnology. I might do something like this. I'm not saying this is what's being done to Eleanor White. I'm saying this is one trick they could use. So, she put the glass of water down on her desk and observed it vibrating. What I would do in their position is I would get a workman to drill a hole in the desk beforehand, and I'd put the guts of a pager or cell phone inside that hole. I'd have a carpenter fill the hole up, someone who can do a good enough job to fool an engineer. I'm sure that would be pretty easy to do. Aside from the neurotechnology, there's nothing exotic about this. All the skills and materials are easy to come by. So she comes up with this idea, or she thinks it's her idea. Let's place a glass of water on the desk and see if it vibrates when my body isn't in contact with it. So they move her arm to place the glass of water in exactly the right spot. She isn't aware of this. I've already gone over this on my site. It's been known for decades that evoked actions, people just rationalize them away. She thinks it's all her ideas and her actions. She observes the water vibrating, and the reason it's vibrating is because they called the pager or cell phone. She doesn't know any of this is going on behind the scenes. All she knows is what she sees, and she thinks she's gotten a glimpse into their technology. She might even measure it with a seismograph and confirm it's really happening. So that's how they could have planted disinformation in her head. No new physics, just neurotechnology and psychological operations. But she isn't allowing for the possibility that she's been deceived, and that's a problem. I'll get into that some more later. Another experiment she ran was where she got into a steel cage that supposedly damps electromagnetic fields down as low as 10 kilohertz by 100 decibels. So basically, no signals or attacks should get through. And she spent the night in the cage, actually several nights, and they still got to her. And they didn't set off her personal dosimeter. So based on this, and based on other experiences like the seismograph experiment, she concludes that they have this incredibly advanced technology that can pass through steel, pass through the walls of her residence, not set off a dosimeter, not set off any instruments, but still have devastating effects on human flesh. An alternative theory, which makes a lot more sense, is that the reason they were able to get at her is she brought the electronic harassment into the cage with her. She had an implant, or multiple implants, and those implants were programmed to go off a couple of hours after she went in. And of course, that wouldn't have set off the dosimeter. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't think this technology uses new physics. I think it's mostly just advanced engineering, like neurotechnology, and psychological operations. These people abusing neurotechnology are just pretending to be much more powerful than they really are. You've seen this with gang stalking. You're seeing this with the incredibly advanced perp technology. And it works through slates of mind. Not sleight of hand, but sleight of mind. That works very well if the target doesn't realize that neurotechnology is being used against him. Okay, next bit of disinformation. This Clinton video in which he apologizes for MKUltra, allegedly apologizes for MKUltra abuses. I've seen it. I'm sure you've all seen it. It was one of the first things I thought of when I did a recent article on the radio silence on mind control experimentation over the last 30 years. I immediately thought, oh yeah, I've got to put that in there. So I did. And fortunately, about half an hour later, somebody dropped by and asked, are you sure he really apologized for MKUltra? I know he apologized for the human radiation experiments, and I know he apologized for the Tunguski experiments, but I'm not sure he ever apologized for MKUltra. So I did some fact checking. A very unusual step for most people doing conspiracy research. I checked the sources. And this is one of the reasons I can't just slap stuff up on my site without checking it, because whenever I check out these pedigreed conspiracy documents, I always find problems. This video was no exception. I looked into it and I found out the Clinton MKUltra video wasn't really an MKUltra apology. It was a video of Clinton apologizing for something else. Clinton has apologized for lots of things. In 1995, he apologized for the human radiation experiments. October 3rd, 1995. He used the exact same wording you see in that alleged MKUltra apology video. What he said was, thousands of government-sponsored experiments did take place at hospitals, universities, and military bases around our nation. Some were unethical, not only by today's standards, but by the standards of the time in which they were conducted. They failed both the test of our national values and the test of humanity. And this is a 35-second video clip available on YouTube. There's a couple of copies of this video, one uploaded in 2005 and one a little later. I eventually found a transcript of his apology, issued on October 3rd, 1995, for the human radiation experiments. He did say those words, but he also said, after military bases around our nation, the goal was to understand the effects of radiation exposure on the human body. So whoever put that video up on YouTube, there had to be some person somewhere down the line who edited the video to leave that quote out, because it would have made Clinton's apology look very different. It would have been obvious that he was not talking about MKUltra. I thought that was very interesting. I took that video of my article, and I went through the list of videos on the website, and took it out of there too. I made a note saying, whoops, I made a mistake. That was actually not an apology for MKUltra. I went to the videos and left comments saying, hey, you got your facts wrong. And I could have left it there, but I didn't. I was wondering, what other TIs have fallen for this? And of course, the first TI who came to mind was the one with the most popular and oldest website, Eleanor White, who has the website raven1.net. So I searched for the video on her website and I found it. The way I found it was I just did a Google search restricted to her domain for Clinton MKUltra. It was right there. And I was like, huh, looks like Eleanor White fell for it. I did a couple more searches and I found some other people had fallen for it, like Mark Dice. He's an up-and-coming truther, trying to be the next Alex Jones or something. He committed this misinformation to paper in his book. So some pretty high-profile names have fallen for this misinformation. I could have left it there. I could have just told myself, people don't do their research, even I fell for it at one point, what can you do? But I did one more crucial step, which led me down a new path of investigation. As part of the fact-checking process, just to make sure that Eleanor White did have this video up on her website, I clicked her link. This gave me a Windows Media file showing him apologizing. And I noticed something peculiar. First of all, her video was much higher quality than the videos on YouTube. Those videos on YouTube were really low quality, apparently because they've been translated between formats at least once. The second thing I noticed was, those videos on YouTube are 35 seconds. Her video is 38 seconds. It has additional information in it. She couldn't have gotten her video from those YouTube sources. And then I wondered, how long has she had this up on her site? So I turned to a useful tool, the Internet Archive, archive.org. And I went back in time to earlier versions of that page. 2007, still there. 2006, still there. 2005, as far back as the first appearance of the YouTube Clinton video, still there. And then I went back some more. It was still there in 2004. And 2003. It was there in December of 2003. So like I was saying, at some point, someone had to edit that video misleadingly to take out words which showed the apology was really about the human radiation experiments, and then misleadingly labeled the apology as an MKUltra apology. Either Eleanor White had to do this herself, or she was one of the very first people to be fooled by that video. And I'm not taking a position on which of those things it is, but it is a fairly high quality video. Another morsel of disinformation that's out there related to targeting, cause stalking. I've covered that several months ago, in October of 2010 actually. I was aware of this information from nearly the beginning when I started up my site. I didn't really dig into it because I didn't feel it applied to me. I couldn't believe that alleged anti-government gangs were running around with energy weapons and mind control technology. But maybe there was something like what I was experiencing, only without the technology. It's possible, I thought. And I didn't really question the story because, and you'll hear this again and again, I figured the people behind it were on my side. In late 2010, I felt I had a very good handle on what was being done. And I started taking a much closer look at these misleading stories. I decided to investigate what was being said about cause stalking. And how did I do this? I got my hands on a copy of the book. You always have to get to the source. Ultimately, that's what you have to do. I decided that I couldn't trust other people's reviews of that book. I had to look at it myself. I've gone into the book in much greater detail before, but basically, if you look at the physical book, it looks like it was bound to Kinko's. It's a very short book, less than 20,000 words, something that could have been dictated to a secretary in a few hours. And it's remarkably short on facts. It's just full of glittering generalities about what these alleged perps do and how the police are involved, and of course the government is definitely not involved. I looked a lot more closely at that book, who the author was, what the claims were. Eleanor White says this book was independently published, but it looks like David A. Lawson and Scrambling News, the allegedly independent publisher of the book, are the same entity. And I did find a fictitious business name registration for David A. Lawson, where he registered Scrambling News in 1998. And he does have a PI license in Florida, but it's a Class CC license, which is something you could get after 48 hours of study. This guy's claiming he has 20 years of experience, and if he really has all that experience, he could get a Class C license in Florida, which only requires 2 years of verifiable experience. If he didn't get that license, I don't think he has verifiable experience. Then I looked more closely at his claims of experience. He doesn't say that he has 20 years of experience solving these cases involving huge gangs of cause stalkers. He's just saying he has 20 years of experience working cause stalking cases. And a cause stalking case could involve just one stalker. So really, Lawson is saying very little about himself, or his credentials, or the subject of his book, but people read what they want to read into it. They allow themselves to believe he's really talking about gang stalking because they want to believe it. And that goes back to what I said at the beginning of the hour. People believe disinformation because it gives them something they want. Like in this case, they want to see a book in print that validates their experiences. They want it to be true so badly, they overlook the inconsistencies. Cause stalking is a very convenient explanation for what many TIs are going through, because part of the psychological torture protocol involves making the target feeling guilty. Making people feel guilty for real or alleged crimes puts them on the defensive. It lowers their resistance to psychological manipulation. How convenient, then, that this book comes along and says, yep, everything is exactly as it seems. These people have judged you and found you lacking. Or they think you're as guilty as hell. Or they're a bunch of judgmental morons and they've just decided to make themselves judge, jury, and executioner. So this book fits very neatly into what I've been describing. What many targets are coming to understand is a government-designed psychological torture protocol. I found the book doesn't really stand up to scrutiny. Now, I've been tearing into Raven1.net a lot on this call. This actually ties into what I said earlier about confirmation bias. You'll notice I'm looking for disinformation on Eleanor White's site, and I'm finding it. because that's the way it works. If you look for evidence, you will find it. And I'm very aware that on this call about confirmation bias and disinformation, it appears that I am succumbing to confirmation bias. Now I have to fight that confirmation bias off. On any large site discussing black operations, secret government programs, and so on and so forth, they're secrets. You're just going to find a lot of bad information. And that's just the way it is. Raven1.net, being a large archive of information about black operations and secret government projects, is going to have a lot of misinformation and even disinformation. So to be fair, you can't condemn her on the basis of her having bad information on her site. Her site can actually be useful. All that government-sponsored disinformation can serve a useful purpose in terms of historical research. How did we come to believe what we came to believe? It's all right there on her site. Here's the thing. Here's where I'm getting a little harsh. At some point, you can gather all this evidence, you can gather all these puzzle pieces, but at some point, an investigator has to assemble all the pieces into a story that makes sense. And this is where she falls down. As of today, as of March 19th, just a few days ago actually, she's got her fully deciphered, fully assembled explanation of what targets are going through, and it's all about cause stalking. It's right up there on her site. Cause stalking is unbelievable, and I do not know why she is promoting this unbelievable explanation for what TIs are going through. I've heard her story. Well, yes, this obviously isn't true. But we have to educate the public about cause stalking before we get to the real explanation of what TIs are going through, because the public seems to respond better to stories about stalking. This is basically the noble lie rationalization. We're telling a lie, yes, but it's for good purposes. Once again, the public sees right through that. So my message to Eleanor White is, it's not working. Take it down. Focus on what's really happening. Don't leave the public through this thicket of disinformation to get through, to get to the real explanation. All right, enough negativity. How can we fight disinformation? How can we prevent disinformation from propagating and doing its damage to TIs? Rule number 1, check sources. Don't simply uncritically accept others' summaries of what's in those sources. If necessary, get the sources into your hands yourself. Closely following that, if someone's explanations make it hard for you to track down the sources, you should avoid those explanations. That includes my site or any other site. If you think that a writer is making it hard to determine where he's getting his conclusions from, you should avoid his writings. You also need introspection and self-analysis, especially when you're confronting a really tempting tidbit of information or disinformation. Would a third party who's not targeted see the same things you do? Are you falling prey to confirmation bias? Are you being seduced by information that seems to be giving you exactly what you want? Vindication, public recognition, or validation of your personal story. Question authority figures. Does the authority figure look like a nutcase? Does his argument hinge on his or her credentials, like a PhD? Investigate those claims. Do the credentials relate to the claims the authority figure is making? For example, Nick Begich. He has a doctorate in traditional medicine. What does that have to do with neurotechnology? Very little. But he's putting that doctor before his name on everything he writes about the subject. Ask yourself why that is. In the process of doing research, you will find claims on manufacturers' sites. Consider the source. The manufacturer has made a substantial investment and must recover it. Manufacturers are willing to say whatever it takes to sell their products. Their claims have to be discounted. Challenge people's sources. If people tell you stuff and they don't tell you where they heard it, find out. On the internet, I heard it somewhere, I don't know where. That's not good enough. When I'm moderating a forum or a website, I prune comments for a reason. There's going to be people who read every single comment and they take the information off there, whether it has sources or not, and they go onto the conference calls and say, oh, I heard this on the internet, blah, 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 BS, BS, BS. And then someone else who read exactly the same comment says, oh yeah, I heard that too. and a new disinformation campaign is born. When challenging disinformation, do your homework. Don't accuse people of spreading disinformation simply because you don't like the information. If someone's wrong, you should be able to explain why. Be diplomatic. Publicly humiliating people will put them on the defensive and actually strengthen their resistance to truthful information. You want to give people who are wrong an opportunity to admit they're wrong without losing face. It's not a crime to be wrong. It's not an incurable condition. Unfortunately, sometimes you do have to consider the source. There are a handful of unhinged individuals roaming the conference calls and the mailing lists, and they aren't amenable to reason, and they don't get diplomacy. They'll just go into attack mode when you say something they don't like. Talking these people down from their trees is going to be a group effort. One can't do it alone. Sometimes you just have to ignore people. In conclusion, I would say, it's okay to be wrong. Everybody's wrong sometimes. What sets a bad actor apart from a misled actor is how he reacts when he learns he's wrong. A misled actor will follow up and fix a mistake, and ideally admit to the mistake in a public way, or provide supporting information showing he isn't wrong. A bad actor will rationalize mistakes or attack critics. You have to dig into the underlying details to find out whether someone is defending the truth or a lie. Most people don't want to do this work. They'll just observe which side seems to be shouting the loudest. Society at large is wealthy enough to afford these shouting matches, or that's how it looks, but we definitely can't afford them. Disinformation is a luxury that we just can't afford.